including GHG accounting, climate risk assessment, Paris Agreement.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for still being here at, I think it's the last day of COP, or the last but one day of COP, and thank you for hanging in there for today's event. We're very happy to have you take part in this workshop on emerging best practices for Paris alignment. My name is Claire Chalier, and for those of you who don't already know me, I'm head of the Mainstreaming Climate and Financial Institutions Initiative. And we're very happy to have this event hosted by IDFC, our newly formalized partners, which we signed an MOU with earlier this week. This event was organized, I think, with the idea of providing some insights on some of the latest developments in terms of approaches and practices that are being implemented both by the Mainstreaming Initiative supporting institutions and IDFC members. So we've planned a very, hopefully, dynamic discussion for today with a very esteemed panel. And we're going to be having representatives from both the research area, but also from development finance institutions. The event will be structured in two parts. During the first part of today's conversation, we'll have research presented to us, the latest research on Paris alignment. Some work that's currently being carried out by CPI and I4C, and we'll have one of our panelists from a development finance institution reflecting on what will have been presented. And then during the second part of the discussion, we'll be having a more informal conversation on what development finance institutions are doing and how they've been implementing their latest approaches. So without any further ado, I think I'm going to turn it straight over to Nicole, because we have a nice long list of panels to come up. So I'll pass it over to you, Nicole. You're manager at CPI, Climate Policy Initiative, and you're going to present some of the preliminary observations and recommendations that you have come up with together with I4C on Paris alignment.
Great, thank you, Claire. So, looking at, so first of all, I'm Nicole from CPI. We are an analysis and advisory organization with a deep expertise on climate finance and policy. And as Claire mentioned, for the last 6 months, we've been working with I4CE under the direction of AFD to examine Paris alignment practices for public development banks. So taking a step back and just questioning, what does Paris alignment mean for public development banks? In 2019, CPI and I4CE again actually worked with IDFC to determine how members can best improve their alignment processes. And that research identified 3 key pillars. The first is at the strategic level, which includes incentive structures and objectives. The second is at the country level, which really includes policy advice and risk identification. And the third is at the operational level, which addresses this alignment criteria question, private sector participation, and how to evaluate progress. And our current work is really focused on this operational level, particularly on decarbonization. And that's not to say that the other aspects of Paris alignment, like adaptation and social issues, are not equally as important. It's just to provide focus to this work. And we've come up with some key questions within this framework, including what role do public development banks play in decarbonization? What are the different approaches to net zero or Paris alignment for public financial institutions? And what is the best approach to Paris alignment for public development banks? How does this approach differ between banks by size, type, mandate, and geographic location? So looking a little bit first at this role of public development banks in accomplishing the Paris Agreement goals. They play such a huge role on all these different facets, including supporting national processes to align standards and policies. And this really includes the support of the development of these long-term strategies that underpin some of the public development bank work. It includes supporting non-sovereign entities like public and private companies, financial institutions, and municipalities in developing and achieving their own Paris alignment goals. And we also have directly and indirectly supporting the development and deployment of projects and initiatives that are climate positive, but also support Paris alignment in all aspects of financing. There's the maximizing the climate positive impact, mobilizing multiple sources of climate finance, including that private sector mobilization through risk sharing instruments, And lastly, developing and accelerating transition-related finance. This has been a big topic of this COP. How do public development banks step into this riskier area to really drive real economy or emissions reductions? So in undertaking this work, we've had a number of calls with public development banks and meetings. We actually have a steering committee that's comprised of a number of public development banks that are quite advanced in their Paris alignment processes. And we've really identified that they share this unique theory of change to Paris alignment. And I want to stress that this is a paraphrasing. It's not directly coming from any of those public development banks. But the idea is that in order to really support this mandate of development and all these roles that public development banks play in achieving Paris Agreement goals, they really need to align their financing with Article 2.1c, this idea of making financial flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emissions and climate-resilient development. And in order to do this, they've developed this Paris-aligned project-level approach, which is the rather long term that we've been using to kind of identify this approach. And the idea that we've defined this as really supporting the development and implementation of low-emissions, climate-resilient investments that support national development and long-term decarbonization strategies, so really rooted in those long-term strategies and scenarios. And the idea is that the ultimate impacts of this approach come across Article 2.1a on the global temperature goals and 2.1b on that adaptation question. So with that in mind, most of the public development banks are fairly aligned in their approach. They have this Paris-aligned project approach that's really centered in facilitating climate-positive investments in line with these country development pathways. There's a new focus on transition planning that's fairly wide across the public development bank ecosystem, especially for hard-to-decarbonize sectors. And there's this goal to have larger synergies and co-benefits with other public development bank objectives. But we've really identified a handful of outstanding questions in this work, including, you have this public development bank ecosystem that involves banks in different geographies, different mandates, sizes, types, ones that are working within a different context than others, in terms of national development contributions, really trying to identify across this ecosystem, what are the outstanding questions that exist? So what additional tools and approaches can be used by public development banks to assist with the alignment and maximization of these co-benefits questions? How do different approaches of the public development banks that are currently being undertaken relate to Article 2.1a, 2.1b, and 2.1c differently? And is there a role for net zero targets and portfolio emissions tracking for some public development banks depending on their context? And that last question I know has gotten a lot of attention here at COP, and it's been very contentious and political, lots of interesting thoughts around that. So more largely, we have identified a variety, of existing tools and practices that may be helpful in identifying these co-benefits and assessing impacts. I'm not going to run through the whole laundry list now, but we're trying to identify areas that have come from really advanced, climate-ambitious public development banks that are using a variety of tools to kind of build out their own methodologies and assessment aspects. And we're also looking at, what has the private sector done under this net zero portfolio level approach that's working for them? Is there anything that they've developed in terms of these kind of quantitative tools that can be useful for different public development banks? So we have found, however, that not all tools are best for every context. Different public development banks each have their own constraints, both in terms of capacity, scalability, they have their own markets, they have different clients. There's no one-size-fits-all solution, which is really sort of the story of climate finance in general, but particularly here. And so some of these are best suited for certain environments. We actually are working to have a paper coming out early next year that really kind of tries to figure out where different public development banks can use different tools to really help that maximization of co-benefits and maximize their impacts. So we've identified kind of four key quadrants. We have tools that have a high technical demand but aren't particularly scalable. And this includes things like assisting in the development of these long-term strategies. It's such a key part that underpins the Paris alignment approach. How do banks really assist countries in developing those and making them robust and ambitious? We also have things like counterparty engagement targets. There's lots of questions about what the role of public development banks or even commercial banks here have and what power they have with working with their counterparties. But we've really identified that there's a handful of public development banks that do have these really robust counterparty engagement processes and some targets associated with that. That being said, it does take a lot of capacity, and it's not something that's easily replicated at scale. In the high technical demand, high scalability area, We have things like intensity targets. We also have climate finance targets, which I know are quite common among public development banks, as well as sector-level mapping. That's gotten a lot of attention in the last couple years, rather than perhaps having portfolio targets or Paris alignment targets in terms of particular areas. How do you develop those on sectoral pathways to really take into account what those national pathways are on a more granular level? And then lastly, we have this kind of low technical demand, low scalability quadrant. You'll find that it's empty. Those don't really seem to be, they don't seem to have a lot of use, and honestly, we didn't find a lot of tools that fit into there. And then lastly, we have low technical demand, high scalability. So these are really those inclusion and exclusion lists, ways that you can make rules that simply guide investment going forward. So that's largely where we're headed in this evaluation and this examination. So I'm happy to turn it over back now to Claire. We'll let everyone know when the paper is released early next year, and we hope to have your thoughts on it.
Thank you very much, Nicole, for sharing some preliminary insights there on the report we're about to publish. And I'm going to, these preliminary insights are going to now be completed by my colleague Luis Zamarioli, who's a research fellow at the Institute for Climate Economics, and who'll be sharing some of the case studies that we were lucky enough, and thank you to the institutions that accepted to be questioned for us, but he's going to be presenting some of the results of the case studies that we had during this research work. Luis, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Claire. Well, so I'll continuing on this study that we are right now finalizing and actually discussing. I'm presenting 3 case studies. We have two other case studies that we have conducted, but I'm not presenting them today because we have the panelists. 2 of the speakers are here. So one is on the Inter-American Development Bank, and we will have later Nora participating with us. And the other one is on AFD, the Agence Française de Développement, and we'll have Laurent speaking right after me. So I'm presenting on the other 3 case studies. So basically, the British International Investment, BNDES, the Brazilian, and 91, which is an asset manager based in South Africa. So the first case study is on the British International. So their climate strategy focused first on 3 main building blocks. The first one is on net zero by 2050. The second one is on the just transition, and the third one is on adaptation and resilience. I think this is interesting because we start to get like how this is applied, what Nicole just said, how this applies to the reality of the development banks. The BII requires the assessment of all potential investments on the basis of strategic contributions to Paris Agreement. So somehow following the methodology of the joint methodology of MDBs, but in their own way. It adds to this methodology its own climate finance target of 30% that they have had since 2021. And they have, and this is quite interesting, the impact and sector level mapping. So to identify opportunities that to ensure also job creation and resilience. So trying to find this co-benefit and bring together climate with other development goals. The strategy maps at sector level and consider other key issues and also mainstreamed issues that should be taken at cross-cutting, like gender. The last one is on physical risk assessments that they ensure the investments are also supporting resilience. As their challenge, it's a comprehensive approach on, as their main challenge is the issue of data, because they have had, and this is something that is, we will see that is similar to other MGBs and other public development banks, which not only on availability of data, but also on comparability, like how this can be comparable, and also the lack of national long-term strategies at the moment by countries. The next case study is on the Brazilian National Development Bank, BNDES. So BNDES it's very aligned with the Brazilian achievement of its net zero, owned as part of its interim goals. It has a net zero by 2050, but also the target of having 50% reduction of emissions by 2030. The main basis for BNDES is the just neutrality strategy, which commits to a few issues. One of them is the carbon neutrality by 2050, neutralizing emissions from scope 1, 2, and work-related travels by 2025, so it's a very short-term target. Completing by 2023, so now, an inventory of scope 3 financed emissions, defining targets for direct, indirect, and variable income portfolios, defining engagement goals to accelerate the transition of counterparties, so intermediates, and how they work with intermediates in Brazil, and overseas, and incorporating carbon accounting into the approval process of projects. The main challenge of BNDES are the long-term goal setting with governance issues, but also and part of this is to ensure that changes in government and changes in the environment are not do not affect necessarily their long-term targets, and they can maintain this and this is quite important. Part of their structure is mixing the blending, the Paris alignment approach with a green taxonomy that was just released last week, actually, together with the Ministry of Finance of Brazil. So trying to achieve this in a mix between sectoral approaches and also net zero. The next one, it's a case study on the 91, which is a global asset owner based in South Africa. They have 150 billion under management, and they are part of the institutional investors group on climate change. They use the SBTI methodology, which aims to 50% of corporate financed emissions covered by net zero targets by 2030. And they have an impact-driven emphasis, which makes them similar to a lot of the development banks because they have this development goals focus. And it's quite interesting because they are trying to categorize investments into buckets. So from companies aiming to start the transition or going to the transition to companies that are already providing solutions to the transition and acting or necessarily acting as enablers to the transition, so promoting this more transformational goal. It has its own 91s, the company's emerging markets transition debt strategy, which has been developed with with a side institute, and this is also, I find, quite interesting because they see divestment as a last resort, so they tend to be more of active with their invested companies and shares and assets to try to shift and push these companies towards the transition rather than divestment. Divestment is really the last one. Their challenge has been normally with sovereigns because they see it's not as easy to influence sovereign as an asset manager, as an owner, but still they have one 91 net zero sovereign index, and they are developing internally so they can advance in how they screen sovereign investments. As you will see, now we will have, Claire will present, but we will have our other presenters and speakers. I think they will go into more detail into this, in how they are finding these challenges in their own institutions. But thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris, for giving some examples of what lies behind the different approaches and methodologies that Nicole was presenting a minute ago. And yes, we're very honored to have one of these representatives from one of the case studies with us, I think, online, I hope. So, yes, Laurent? Laurent, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hello, Laurent. It's great to hear you. Laurent, you're a sustainable finance expert at the strategy department of the French Development Agency, AFD. And I think you wanted to reflect a little bit on what's been said and maybe give us some insights on AFD's approach to Paris alignment as well.
Yes, thank you, Claire. I hope you can hear me well.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So thank you very much for thank you I4C and CPI for organizing this workshop. I wanted to say a few words to explain a little bit why we decided to commission this study. Where basically the backstory behind the current work that I4C and CPI are doing, and perhaps say a little something about how we at AFD think about these matters currently. So this story basically starts in 2017 when AFD adopted a new and ambitious climate strategy. Before 2017, basically our climate strategy hinged around basically increasing our climate finance flows. And in 2017, on the back of the Paris Agreement, we decided to take a more broad and holistic view of climate ambition and defined a strategy around four pillars. So number one, continuing to increase our share of climate finance yearly, so up to the level of 50%. So 50% of our annual flows is climate finance benefits, whether that's mitigation or adaptation to this date. Number two, and this was very new and it took some time to define clearly how we would do this. We decided to commit that 100% of every new financing would be Paris aligned. So we developed tools, basically in-house tools, to help us assess the Paris alignment of every new financing decision that we take at AFD Group. Number three, an intention to contribute to the redirection of financial flows towards the Paris Agreement. Um, uh, um, and through a variety of actions such as the mobilization of private finance, policy support, strategic engagement with partners and clients such as states, obviously, but also non-sovereign entities, right? And number four, a contribution to the development of international norms and practices around sustainable finance. And one way to summarize this approach even further would be to say that basically we de facto consider that there are two dimensions to Paris alignment. One, which is uh, a do no harm approach. So this comes back to the commitment that 100% of our financing decisions are Paris aligned. And this includes exclusion criteria, but also particular qualitative assessment criteria. And number two, an effort to try to maximize our positive impact towards the Paris Agreement goals. And this encompasses our climate finance objectives in terms of volumes, trying to maximize our impacts for every new project, basically engaging in policy dialogue, strategic dialogue with our partners and clients, etc. So do no harm on the one hand, trying to maximize impact on the other. And this dual consideration you will see present also in the joint IDFC MDB declarations, in the MDB building block approach to Paris alignment as well. And the other thing I want to mention about how we see Paris alignment is that I want to insist on this as well, is that we tend to see Paris agreement alignment as a process and not a fixed endpoint. Basically, we consider that on both of these approaches, we want to continue improving and learning and continually raising the bar of our ambition individually and collectively. So, um, so that's basically our approach as it stands today. But the interesting thing is that recently, in the past few years, there have been a few developments that have led us to want to develop a broader conceptual framework of what Paris alignment means that could cater for a wider diversity of financial institutions. Number one, you were all aware of the emergence of net zero commitments and approaches by companies and commercial financial institutions, which has been an impressive and important contribution to the Paris Agreement goals and perfectly in line with the Paris Agreement action agenda. This approach seems to differ from the approach taken by MDBs and most IDFC members. And it can seem to some distant observers that there are mainly now two different approaches to Paris alignment for financial institutions. One which is qualitative, flow-based, and bottom-up, which I've basically described to you from AFD, and another one which is quantitative, stock-based, and top-down. And it can seem puzzling to observers that an institution as committed as we are to Paris alignment hasn't actually taken up a net zero commitment, such as the one that the commercial institutions have. And point in fact, E3G, as you know, has rated a number of MDBs and public development banks, and has rated AFD very favorably, actually, against all of their criteria, but has recommended that we adopt such a net zero portfolio commitment. And we're also faced, as maybe some of the institutions listening, with new European banking regulations, which will require us to report on our financed emissions, as well as on some sectoral carbon intensity metrics, and to define medium-term targets against those sectoral intensity carbon intensity metrics. And last but not least, and this also is perhaps something we share with some of the institutions listening in, is that we are increasingly trying to move from a project approach to a counterparty approach in terms of trying to maximize our impact, and in particular with regards to local public development banks and local commercial financial institutions. And this means basically that over and beyond, the use of proceeds, where we require our financing to be used for, we try to increasingly systematically engage in a strategic dialogue with the financial institution that we are working with, and where it is useful and pertinent to try to support it in developing a transition plan, obviously in collaboration with other partners where they are active. And this means that we need to have a view as to how we assess the degree to which these commercial or public development banks are aligned with the Paris Agreement, catering to a wide variety, diversity of institutions. We are in the process of doing so, and so this study by I foresee in CPI is very timely for that reason as well. So yes, and now all of that being said, I think that yes, the other thing I wanted to mention, obviously, is that this I want to say a little bit something about how we think about the net zero approach that Claire mentioned in passing, but which is, I think, at the core of many of the discussions, as Nicole mentioned, right? So on this particular issue, I think I'm not going to pretend that AFD is agnostic, right, on the net zero portfolio approach. We have made it clear, including in writing publicly, that as it stands, we consider that the portfolio level interim and medium-term target setting approach would not be useful or not make sense for us. And basically, I would like to outline the reasons for that. Basically, there are three categories of reasons why we tend to think that this particular approach would not be applicable or useful for AFD. Number one, there are a number of feasibility and workability issues that might make a portfolio level financed emissions pathway arbitrary and perhaps even meaningless. So, and this is particularly true for a development bank such as AFD, where we hold currently a large proportion of green loans in our portfolio. So we're starting with a very low point, and we also have a very significant share of our portfolio extended to financial institutions, to municipalities, and to governments. And so, and there's also a lot of data issues, right? And so it would be probably challenging to define, some, 8, 7, 10, 12% reduction objective in 5 years, where there's, an 80% high uncertainty on the data underlying the compute, right? So that's one aspect of it. The other one, which is I think important, and possibly we share this with also other institutions, is that we tend to think that the approach we've taken to aligning our financings is actually more stringent and more ambitious than the top-down portfolio level approach. Now, those two are not incompatible, but I think that it's often said that actually the portfolio level approaches to the net zero can be a way to drown out the exclusion criteria dimension of Paris alignment, the do no harm component. So that's an important aspect of it, which is that where it is possible to do so, and in AFD we have this culture of analyzing every project, then we tend to think that in terms of the do no harm side of things, it's much more basically impactful in a sense to look at every project and analyze their compatibility with Paris Agreement, with the countries NDC, etc., etc. Although obviously very time consuming. And the third category of reasons has to do with the impacts, maximizing the impact side of things. Basically, we fear that if we did take this type of portfolio level approach, then it might be actually counterproductive and would hinder us from maximizing our impact. In particular, the support and financing of the transition of highly emissive actors through general corporate loans, which would have a policy matrix attached to it. Typically, the Just Energy Transition Partnership deals, whether they are with states or state-owned enterprises, these types of actions by public development banks can be very impactful, but would necessarily mean that we raise actually our financed emissions. So our responsibility as a development bank, in particularly because we are starting at such a low point in terms of emissive assets, is that we actually might have to raise our financed emissions in the short to medium term rather than reduce it, if we want to actually have a positive impact and a positive contribution to the Paris Agreement goals. So those are basically some of the reasons. I
You can
won't.
hear
I'm
me? Yeah,
aware
I'm
of
going to have to
time.
ask you to wrap up if possible.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
thank you.
So to wrap up, maybe just to say that we're very curious, very keen and interested to hear other institutions' take on this. Very keen to share, best practices, the pros and cons of different approaches, and very happy that CPI and I4CE have accepted to take on this challenge of basically developing a shared conceptual framework around Paris alignment that would cater to this wide diversity of institutions, both commercial, public development banks, and also taking into account the diversity of public development banks that are out there that have very different mandates, sectoral focuses, country focuses, and financial instruments. Thank you very much. Happy
Thank you.
to contribute to the discussion later.
Thank you very much, Laurent, for sharing your thoughts and perspectives on this very, as you said, challenging, I think, topic that we've been working on for a few months now. I love the idea that you said it's a dynamic process and we're continually trying to make it better. And I noted a few words which I'm pleased to say we'll be talking about in the next part of the conversation. I noted net zero, counterparty engagement, sectoral pathways, impact, capacity, just transition, and that's only a few. And I think we're going to be able to dig a little bit deeper into these different concepts during the second part of the discussion, which I think we'll be able to start now. And Laurent, I'll invite you to stay around then to hear on what your peers are doing in relation to all of this. I am now going to ask the three panelists who I believe are here in person to join me, if that's possible. I see Nora, you're over there, Peter to my left, and Silogini. If you could just come and sit up here, and we also have 2 panelists online, I hope. Great. So now we're going to be sharing a bit of experience and putting some background to all these to this conversation. So the discussion is going to take part in 3 steps. First step will be for you to present give us an overall idea of what you've been doing over the past few months and years, and the latest developments on your Paris alignment approaches. We've got some specific questions for each of you in the second step, where we know you've been working particularly hard on, and we'll be trying to dig deeper into those specific questions. And then the last question will relate to the next steps and challenges that you will have identified. So I think the running order will make me start with Kagla from TSKB, just checking to see if she's online, otherwise we can switch. Yes? Great. Let me start by welcoming Kagla Eker and Kloept. I hope I pronounced that right. It's not.
Yes.
Great. You're leader of the Sustainability Management System Working Group at the Industrial Development Bank of Turkey, TSKB. Kagla, could you please share with us some of the latest developments in your Paris alignment strategy, please? And everyone can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you, and nice to meet you. Thank you for inviting us to this spiritual meeting, by the way. So I would like the introduction of TSKB very shortly. I have the time concerns, but TSKB is the first privately owned development bank, development and investment bank of Turkey, established in 1950 by the support of World Bank Group. And today the main shareholder is Turkiye İş Bankası, which is a leading.
Sorry to interrupt. I think you had some slides. We don't see them online. I don't know if that's normal. I just wanted to check before you start.
Yeah, I have 2 slides, but I will show it to you at the end of my speech.
Okay, perfect. Great. That's fine. Just wanted to make sure that it was like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So let me jump to the mission of TSKB. TSKB's mission is supporting Turkey in transition to a low carbon economy. This is important. This is why I would like to highlight this issue, because of this mission, the more than 90% of the portfolio consists of sustainable investments. They are all aligned with the SDGs. This is important. Let me give you some examples from our portfolio. We mostly finance renewable energy investments, energy efficiency, resource efficiency investments. This is what we have in our portfolio. And when we look at the practices, what we are doing at TSKB regarding the climate, I have a few examples as well. For instance, the first CDP report, Carbon Disclosure Project report, was prepared by TSKB in 2013. And also, Sustainability Working Group that I'm leading is responsible for calculating emissions of TSKB. We have been calculating our emissions arising from operational activities since 2012. But in the last 3 years, we more focus on emissions that are arising from our lending activities. Actually, this is the hot topic for today as well. So, in the light of this, what we are financing and what we are doing, what we are capable of, like calculations of the GHG emissions, last year, as TSKB, we became a signatory to Net Zero Banking Alliance and committed to be net zero by 2050. So this is an ambitious target for us. But at the time of giving this commitment, we were well aware that we have a great portfolio. We are able to calculate our GHG emissions. We have a great capacity. We have a great engagement with our clients to achieve this goal, let me say. But by the way, it is again very well known with us that we need a certain roadmap. We need a certain pathway to access this goal, to reach this goal as well. So let me highlight one more issue related with the engagements of TSKB. DSKB became a signatory to SBTI, Science Based Target Initiative, in 2015. That means we are following up the developments in the SBTI side for a long time. And in 2020, the guideline for financial institutions launched by SBTI, and we reviewed a lot, let me say, we studied a lot. And in the last 3 years, we focus on calculations on the carbon intensive sector client. What I mean that STSKB, we have coal-fired power plants, cement factories, and also iron and steel companies in our portfolio. So that we engage with them and we requested several data from them, and we calculated the carbon emission sector clients GHG emissions in 2021 and 23. Actually, the last year we incorporated aluminum sector client emissions as well. So when I compare the operational GHG emissions and the lending activities emissions, the difference is huge. For instance, uh, on the operational side, we are leading we are operating our activities in a headquarters so that we consume electricity, natural gas. The maximum emissions arising from those operational activities is 1,000 tons CO2. But when I calculated the uh, emissions arising from lending activities, now my emissions are around 2.5 million tons CO2. So this is amazing. And this is what financial institutions need to actually, this is what we believe. So what we experienced during these calculations, let me give you some examples according to this. First, we engage with our clients. Those carbon intensive sector clients are subject to MRV regulation, national MRV regulation. Uh, Monitoring, reporting, and verification. So they already calculate their scope 1 GHG emission. So first we collected those data from them, and actually according to the regulation, those figures are subject to an audit that's carried by governmental bodies. So we rely on this data as well because of the regulation. But on scope 3 side, it was more challenging because some of them, yes, calculate their emissions, but some of them does not calculate their scope 2 emissions. So that we requested several data from them. For instance, the natural gas they consumed, the electricity they consumed, or the total production amount, all those data was important for us. And then we compared all those data with the same sectoral benchmark, and at the end, we were able to calculate the GHG emissions of those clients who are operating their business in the carbon intensive sector. And then, yes.
Yes, so I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up, and I think also I'd like to keep a little bit for the second question on how you're calculating your emissions informed your decision making. So if that's okay, if you could just wrap up for this part, and we can keep the rest for the second question.
Let me finish the
Thank you.
speech, and then,
Yes,
of
thank
course,
you.
I will give you information regarding that. I think all the part of related with the GHG emissions of a financial institution is critical, by the way. So you are right with the question. So let me little mention about our SBTI procedures process, because when we calculated the carbon intensive sector emissions, then we submitted SBTI and we engaged with them. We worked with them a lot. It took actually 1 year for us to get the approval from SBTI team, and also thanks to the SBTI team, we asked plenty of questions because yes, there is a guideline related with the financial institution, but still there are several questions to set accurate targets, near-term targets. So I always admire them on motivation of forcing us to set ambitious targets and expanding the coverage of our portfolio. So at the end, this year in July, we received our approval from SBTi. So let me show you our targets.
Yes, Kyle, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up in about 1 minute maximum because we have another lineup of speakers coming up,
Yes.
and I don't want them to finish too late. Thank you.
Okay, you are right. I didn't even mention our scope 1 and 2 targets because the interesting one is the scope 3. And as you see, our SBTi targets, approved targets, represents more than half of the total asset and covers 70% of the bank's total investment portfolio. And my last slide, it is the scope 3 targets of TSKG. As you can see, we receive very ambitious targets on the energy side. For instance, this is electricity generation project finance and corporate loan related target is. It's about 85% reduction per kilowatt hour by 2035. So we studied a lot on the action plans to reach these goals as well. So our other targets are related with real estate sector loans of the SKB, and also the long-term corporate loans and corporate bond side. We have these targets as well. So I'm gonna stop now. We can go on in the next section. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Carla. Thank you very much. And I understand why you want to. There's so much to say, and it's so interesting. And congratulations on as well on the approval of your SPTI targets. And what I suggest maybe is that we pull up those slides a bit later on, so we can have them and everyone can take a better look at what you've been doing and what you've been achieving. But thank you very much for the presentation. I'm now going to turn over to Peter, who's sitting with me. Peter Heliges, you're head of the Competence Center and Energy at KfW Development Bank. I think you just have to turn it on. And if you could just run us through as well what you've been doing at KfW recently on Paris alignment.
So you're saying recently. I thought I started 2017, and well, we've done about 800 transactions since then, so I go through them one by one, and then we see how we developed over time. What do you think?
I think we have to stay for an extra week if we do that, right?
No, but honestly, the journey really started in 2017. So as Laurent was saying earlier, so it was the same for KfW, German Development Bank. And I think the One Planet Summit in Paris was kind of a trigger for this, where our management said, look, guys, we really have to do something different here. And I'm not going through the entire journey, but I just wanted to say, okay, it's 5-6 years now, and it's a huge change process for a bank like KfW. So we have 8,000 employees, we have 150 billion annual lending and financing activities, and to steer that all towards Paris compatibility or Paris alignment is quite a Herculean task. And so I want to kind of ameliorate a little bit the expectations that you can go through change very quickly. I know your mainstreaming climate initiative has been working for a long time, and you see how long it takes to turn around an institution and make it Paris compatible. So what we've been doing is defining change, developing instruments, and now implementing them. So we are moving from change to run, as we used to say in our institution. And I think at the moment the focus is really on getting it done correctly, before we take up the next really big thing that is the next big change, because we all know there are many more to come. But you first have to do right what you were aiming for initially. That's what I believe. So that's one thing. The second point I wanted to make is, to me, Paris alignment means do no harm initially. I mean, that's what Laurent also mentioned, and contributing meaningfully to the two objectives. Any other priority, like I want to be just in the transition financing, or I want to be gender inclusive, or I want to, I don't know, achieve nature-based solutions, to me is not Paris alignment. To me, that's climate finance strategy. Yeah, and there are so many things that you can define and where you can set your priorities, and it depends on your partners, depends on your own capabilities, on your lending instruments, financing, which you choose. And all of them, of course, should contribute to Paris, to the objectives of Paris, but it's not Paris alignment to me. So that was the second point I wanted to make. So to KfW's change, so what we've done is defining Paris alignment for us, developing sector guidelines for 6 heavily emitting sectors, which have been implemented. The 7th one is due next week for oil and gas. So there was a long due thing to happen. It took us a while to get it approved. And next year we hope to add one for corporate finance. So which is unspecific finance on balance sheets, which is kind of a big challenge, how you define that, how you make that Paris compatible. So that's one big, I would say, basket of tools we are implementing. The other one we are implementing right now is greenhouse gas accounting. So I was really surprised to hear that TSKB has done it in a year. I mean, we're not as fast. It's going to take us a while to get it done, 100% of the portfolio, where you have anything from retail lending to German families and up to building refineries or airports. Anything should be greenhouse gas accounted appropriately. It's not easy. So that's another big one. And what we want to do is with that, we want to monitor our pathway towards net zero financed emissions. So the commitment was made. It should be net zero before the half of the century. And so for us, GHG accounting is a monitoring tool, first and foremost. And then the last point is we want to actually move from input monitoring to impact monitoring. So, I mean, we know about climate finance quota, we know about sectoral targets, putting so much money into biodiversity or into NBS or adaptation, but we want to achieve much better, but that's another long process, is using impact KPIs. So we've developed something like 50 plus indicators for the banking group, and right now we're setting up the data collection system, so there's some internal big process going on about agreeing on those indicators and actually collecting the data, putting up a database and a digitalized solution for it so that everything is available and comparable across units in KfW. So that's basically where we are. And the other 800 transactions I will mention in the second round.
Thank you. That's a lot already, and I mean, congratulations as well on the work that you've been carrying out, the sectoral guidelines, which we're very much looking forward to. Greenhouse gas accounting, and good luck with that. And I know it's a long process and it's going to take time. So, impact, if moving from inputs to impact, that's also something that we've been discussing a lot at this COP, and I know it's something that will be of interest to a lot of your peers around here. Thank you for that, Peter. I'm now going to turn over to Siloshini Naido, your head of ESG at the Development Bank of Southern Africa, DBSA. Same question goes to you. If you could please tell us where you are, and maybe you can reflect as well on what some others have been doing.
Thank you. I try to be the head of ESG most days. I think thank you for the opportunity to speak today on this, on this topic. It's always really useful to understand where others are. It really isn't. It's a mammoth task to deal this. It's not as easy, and I could relate to everything that KfW is going through now, because we probably are going through almost exactly the same, probably a lot more change. When you're looking at things like alignment, keeping stakeholders happy, I think that the DBSA had its challenges there. I worked for the private sector for a while, almost a decade, the commercial banking space. And I can tell you things are a lot more complicated and complex in a public development space. That's mainly because obviously we've got obligations, we've got shareholders, National Treasury being one of our being our shareholder. We've got stakeholders in the public side. We've got to also make sure that we're keeping our country ambitions at heart. So the NDC story becomes our story effectively. And so you can't just jump ahead and start to put out these ambitious kind of, goals when it is not compatible with the likes of our stakeholders. So I think, that's basically where we are right now, or that's why it probably took a longer time. And where we are right now is obviously starting our journey around the TCFD reporting framework, recommendations. Now it's very interesting. TCFD has effectively now moved to the ISSB. And so that is going to be a very interesting space, though that was very well anticipated it was going to come. And so where we are internally, we've actually made some good traction in terms of getting the governance piece right. So at the board level, we have a good structure in place in terms of our environmental ethics, story. They would have the mandate, or we've drafted a terms of reference where they would be looking at key environmental matters. And then at the EXCO level, we're looking to have a EXCO structure that would now be dedicated to looking at sustainability matters, and agree with the comment that it is much, much wider than just carbon intensity. I mean, you're dealing with human rights matters now, which has also become extremely topical. You're dealing with gender policy matters that also have taken an entire identity of its own, where gender is no longer just seen as female empowerment. There's an entire new dimension to it. And so you've got to take a cross-cutting approach when you're looking at just transition strategies, which obviously the DBSA have for a very long time spoken around. So in terms of, I just want to make a comment or two because the other comments were covered. When we look at, so where we are right now in terms of instruments, looking at pricing, I saw, shadow carbon pricing is not even anywhere near where we are right now. We're looking at things like transition-related finance instruments. Before you do that, you've got to look to your balance sheet to see where that can come from. You also need to look at your strategies. So Treasury, we're having discussions with Treasury. We've got a climate finance unit that gets, concessional finance. And so all of that comes into play when you're looking at pricing, strategic tilt, portfolio tilt, and so forth. We're very fortunate. We've got a very heavy renewable energy, asset class on our book. And on that basis, it makes things slightly easier for us. However, we have the issue around, we've got some corporate transactions on our book, corporate clients. And so, we've made a statement fairly recently that we will support clients in carbon-intensive sectors, provided they have a transition plan. And then therein comes a whole host of other complexities operationally. What is a transition plan? Does your credit committee understand what that means? Do your own staff on the ESG side actually understand what that means? And incidentally, we used the CPI transition guidelines. So well done to the team, but I've used it quite a few times in terms of, it's not a tick box exercise. It really is, I use it as a guidance note. And so it's a good, useful reference point. And obviously you go through the motions of trying to ensure your credit committee doesn't take it as a tick box. So there's a lot of education that comes with that. education all around for everyone internally, forget about externally. And then obviously we're dealing with multilateral institutions. We've got lenders to keep happy, and so on that basis they would be looking for consistency. So our journey is very much in that respect. And last comment on SBTI, I know they released several papers in June. I actually have been using that because that was actually what their request was, for us to try to flight it and see how palatable it is. I find it quite useful when dealing with emerging market economies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tilushini. That was very interesting again. Interesting to see as well how the challenges that come with all these different topics that we're discovering as we get deeper into Paris alignment and what it means and how it's interlinked with other challenges related to development. So, thank you very much for that insight. Now to Nora, sitting next to me, Laura Lambrecht, your Climate Risk Officer at IDB Invest. Thank you for being with us. If you could maybe tell us a little bit about your journey as well as being working with private counterparts as well. Thank you.
Sure. So, hi everyone. So IDB Invest indeed works with the private sector in Latin America and the Caribbean across different verticals. So we do on-lending through financial intermediaries, finance infrastructure projects, and also do financing to corporates. So a lot of the things that were said before by speakers resonated a lot. Change management process, education, capacity building, internally, and of course also externally. This is what we've been doing over the past few years extensively. As a multilateral development bank, we are applying the 6 building blocks for Paris alignment. So in that regard, we are framing Paris alignment more broadly than the assessment of operations, but we view also climate finance, for instance, and the alignment of internal operations, walking the talk, as part of that. And at the end of 2021, we, as the IDB Group, we committed to assess all operations for Paris alignment starting in 2023, and in fact become 100% aligned as of the beginning of this year. So this year for us, things really became serious. And I want to touch a few points. So I'd like to talk a little bit about also the sector guidance notes and what we've been doing on the technical level, but also a little bit sort of about the processes and disclosure and transparency. So at the technical level, similar to KfW, we've been developing sector guidance notes. There are still a couple that are pending to be published, but many of them have already been released, for instance, on energy, on water and sanitation, on agri-food systems. And we've been doing that together as an IDB group, so together with our public sector colleagues and with the IDB lab. We have also published an overall Paris alignment implementation approach that really is the governance basis for us and that outlines some core principles, and it's all underpinned by the common MDB methodology that you can also find online that is public. So there are a lot of documents that we have to bear in mind because frankly, it is complex. And I always say we need to be simple without being simplistic, because making sure that operations become Paris aligned, you really need to square some circles. It's a lot of nuances that you need to consider, partially because NDCs right now are simply not in aggregate at the 1.5 degree goal. That's one of the main challenges. But so we've been trying to set up really that governance basis to, at least at the process level, be very clear and to also protect our team. So one thing that was very important for us is to have a 4I principle, because these Paris alignment assessments sometimes can be so subjective, because it's not a black and white thing and it's not just inclusion and exclusion list for us. For some projects it is. We're never financing anything of like coal electricity generation, for instance, or upstream oil and gas is also on our exclusion list. And then there are some things on the mitigation side, like solar panels, for instance, that are considered universally aligned. But there are a lot of projects in between. So what we've really been trying to do is to leverage both our advisory services team that has a lot of deep climate expertise, and at the same time also our ESG team, so the safeguards team. So that links again a little bit to the do no harm. So to really have both of these teams and their complementary expertise be leveraged, and to also make sure, we heard CPI earlier talk about incentives, that we do the assessments sort of agnostic of any investment incentives and so forth, so that we can really do deep technical assessments. On transparency, I'd like to mention that so since this year, we publish environmental and social information on all of our projects, and we are now also disclosing whether we've assessed the project for Paris alignment and whether or not the project is Paris aligned. So far, because of our 100% commitment, we have not disclosed. All of our projects that we've disclosed have indeed been concluded to be Paris aligned. And that, I think, also relates a little bit to the emissions question. So we've been TCFD committed since 2019, and as part of these TCFD reports, we've also been disclosing on our emissions. And I agree very much with what the AFD said, that perhaps for development banks, emission targets are less meaningful. Yet, we think that providing transparency to our stakeholders is important. So whenever emissions are material on a project basis in our disclosure, we will disclose what the emissions are, what they're estimated to be, and in our TCFD reports, we're also publishing some portfolio metrics. There are no specific targets. Again, I'm not going to reiterate what AFD said. It's very much, we need to finance the transition. So we think that our Paris alignment commitment is perhaps the stronger commitment and the stronger indication, but we do think that transparency to our stakeholders is very critical. Yeah, perhaps I'll just stop here because it's a lot of things to go through. It's been a multi-year journey, and also welcome any questions on more specific things afterwards.
Thank you so much, Nora, and congratulations on the work that you've been doing as well. And I think lots of people will relate to the "it's not black and white" argument that you put forward, because I think that's the issue for many of us here, is to determine what we can classify as aligned and misaligned, and that's the difficult task really here. And also leveraging expertise both on the safeguard side, but also on the climate positive side, if I could put it like that. I'm going to turn over to our last panelist, Vincent Duginhauer. Hopefully you can hear me from online. And I can see you.
Yes, I'm here. Good afternoon.
Great, we can hear you too. Perfect. You're head of Green Financial System, Southern and Eastern Mediterranean at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the EBRD. Same question for you, first of all, if you can relate maybe to what's been said and tell us a little bit about your experience at EBRD on Paris alignment.
Yes, by all means, Claire, thank you, and thank you for having me. I had a couple of slides. I don't know if you can put them up. If not, I can also speak without them.
Yes, I see some nodding at the back of the room.
So maybe before I start, just to briefly introduce EBRD, we're part of the MDB family. We have a very private sector focus. Historically, we've done about 75% of our finances in the private sector, which I think also informs a bit our engagement and thinking on Paris alignment and transition planning. I wanted to just touch base on two questions during these introductory remarks. First of all, speaking a bit about how we support transition planning as part of our Paris alignment methodologies, and then, if time allows, giving a couple of examples of how we're engaging with clients and counterparts in practice. So to start, as was already mentioned, as many of the other MDBs, we are now formally committed to align all our activities with the goals of the Paris Agreement as of the end of 2022. We've developed a detailed methodology to support Paris alignment assessment.
Have we lost him? Oh. Yes, okay, that's a shame. Okay, Well, in that case, what I suggest, because I know that one of our panelists needs to leave us at 3, Peter, I'm turning to you. What I might do, therefore, is ask you the second question and maybe the last question at the same time. So it was more of a specific question for KfW, and we can take EBRD back a bit later on. Peter, we had a specific question for you. As a bilateral development bank operating in multiple countries and sectors, and I know you've already touched on it a little bit, if you could go a little bit deeper on how you deal with the issue of alignment to different pathways, how do you measure and ensure the comparability of the different approaches, and maybe also if you could give us your ideas on next steps for moving from outcomes and impact and Paris alignment more generally. It's the last question.
Yes. It's a good specific question because we haven't really found agreement about how to handle this. As you know, KfW works on behalf of the German government, and there's a political dimension behind this. Which pathway do you finance? So the basis for our sector guidelines is a global pathway. So it's IEA driven. So the net zero scenario is a global one from which we derive our sector guidelines and the transition pathways. And obviously they are not applicable in each and every country. So that's one issue we are facing. On the other hand, we have our Ministry of Development Cooperation and other climate ministries in Germany who are saying, okay, we want to support countries on their way to net zero, and they have to be 1.5 degree compatible. But what do you do if they don't have a respective national pathway? And we are trying to convince our government that there must be this room to maneuver with countries. Okay, EBRD is back on. So that
take your time, it's fine. We'll have him afterwards.
Yeah, so there must be this room to maneuver. And there has not been an explicit decision yet on behalf of our government how to handle this. And in the meantime, we're just muddling through, honestly, which I think is appropriate because this is a political consensus building. And as we can see here at the COP, if you talk about the global stocktake and you see the countries defending what they're doing or what they are not doing and agreeing to the next steps, obviously, there has to be this space, and that's the only way, I guess, we as a bank can also act, that we work in that space, because it doesn't make a difference to a country, to most countries, if KfW says, no, we don't work with you because you're not net zero 2050. Then okay, we don't work with them, but it doesn't make a difference. So it's this partner engagement thing that was also mentioned before, which applies, I think it was on the first presentation, the CPI one, where you said, okay, country strategy and operation, so country, partner engagement, working with partners on a country level, but also on an institutional level, so like financial institutions, utilities, municipalities, all these partners, and working with them towards better, improved 1.5 degree pathways. That is the way we're dealing with this. And we don't force it upon partners. I mean, that's also been a debate between institutions. I know EBRD, for example, says it's compulsory. You have to be, So Paris aligned, and if you don't, we hate you. But for us, it's not. We don't do it that way. It's just been our decision that we believe it should be partner chosen and implemented and then supported. So that's my answer to your specific question.
Thank you, Peter. Do you know EBRD is back, right? So you'll be able to react to what you just said. And he's coming up next. Thank you, Peter. And I know you have to leave, so thank you very much for being with us. Vincent, I don't know if you heard what was just said, but
yes,
I'll let you move forward with the presentation. Either you can react or stop or take it up where you were. Whatever.
We actually stopped using Zoom for corporate purposes. I think I was kicked out because I didn't realize I was on the free version. So sorry for that. No maybe just to respond on the last point by the KfW colleague, we certainly don't hate clients that that are not aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement. I think for us it was a demand from our shareholders, right? So we committed to this. And that's why we're doing it. But I think it's also, for us, it's, I mean, we can relate to the fact that this is also a gradual process, right? Which was already mentioned. So As I will also mention in our approach and how we work with financial institutions, it's not like we will discontinue our client relationships as of the 1st of January 2023. Of course, we appreciate this. This takes time. So I think I was just explaining that we have a detailed methodologies to support our Paris alignment assessment of all our transactions, both the transactions that we finance directly, but also indirectly with financial institutions. This methodology is publicly available, and we have tailored approaches, as I said, for our transactions with corporate clients and financial institutions. And let me maybe speak a bit to the second part, so how we work with financial institutions, which is probably most relevant for today's discussion. So in essence, our approach to Paris alignment with financial institutions consists of 4 pillars. The first pillar, overall pillar, is a client commitment to Paris alignment. This entails that each client that we work with needs to take on an overall commitment that they will in time align their financial operations with the goals of the Paris alignment. And then depending on the transaction, we have 2 different approaches for financing with financial institutions. So the first approach is a use of proceeds approach, which in essence is a transaction through which we have a clear visibility on how our finance will be used by our financial institution. So it's with clarity on what sub-transactions will be financed by the financial institution, and we are comfortable that these sub-transactions are Paris aligned. So this may be, for example, a trade finance line or a dedicated line to SMEs. This is the first use of proceeds approach. Now, for those transactions where we have less visibility on our use of proceeds, so for example, in equity, when we take equity in a financial institution, we use pillar 3 and 4 to confirm Paris alignment. And this, in essence, consists of 2 elements. First of all, we do a counterparty assessment. So we assess the current climate risk management and other TCFD areas alignment of the financial institution. And we make sure that there's a clear plan to improve these practices in time. And pillar 4 is the development of a transition plan. So this was already discussed extensively before. In essence, we will work with a financial institution to put in place a transition plan that will ensure that the financial institution in time will align its lending and other practices with the Paris Agreement. So for us, this whole transition plan is one of our key elements of our Paris alignment approach. Next slide, please. I think in time we expect that most of our transactions will start following this pillar 3 and pillar 4 approach. So just to give you a sense of where we stand at the moment, probably about 90% of the projects we do financial institutions at the moment follow the pillar 2 route for Paris alignment, where we combine the overall commitment to Paris alignment and the visibility on the sub-transactions to confirm Paris alignment. But starting from this year, and this will probably take about 5 years, we will slowly move into this counterparty assessment and transition plan with sort of an indicative target that within 5 years, the majority of our clients will have a transition plan in place. So what are expectations on transition plan preparation? I think, as I already mentioned, we of course appreciate that financial institutions are at different stages in their transition planning journey. So we also sort of account for this when we set our expectations for the contents of a transition plan. We've identified the 3 stages: early stage, developing practice, and advanced practice. Of course, in time, we would want all our financial institutions to align with the advanced practice approach. But this is also a process that will take some time. So, for example, a bank that is sort of currently assessed to be at early stage of its processes will be expected to have a transition plan that aligns with our developing practice sort of category within 2 years of signing the loan agreement. What are some guiding principles that we follow for transition planning? First of all, we want a very clear commitment from the financial institution to put in place a transition plan. We want this transition plan to include an action plan with intermediary and intermediate targets, and also targets how the bank aims to reach net zero by 2050. And of course, disclosure and reporting is a key element of our transition plans that we'll be developing with our clients. Very briefly, just some examples of what we have done so far. We've started engaging with a number of clients to develop a transition plan. We're currently working with banks in Jordan, Serbia, and Mongolia. Some of these banks are developing transition plans independently with our sort of overall guidance. Some others are getting technical support provided by our donors. The second important element is engagement with regulators. So we're working with a number of central banks in our region to work in terms of putting in place the right regulatory framework. So for example, we have an MOU with the Central Bank of Morocco, and we're also working with the Central Bank of Armenia. And we hope to launch similar country programs in Turkey and Tajikistan next year. We also have a couple of tools available. As I mentioned, we have Paris alignment metrics for financial institutions. This is a tool through which we assess the maturity of financial institutions in terms of their climate practices. And we're also using our online platform called the Green Finance Academy, under which we also have dedicated learning for our partner financial institutions. I think that was it.
Thank you. Yes, that was it.
Very
Thank you
much.
very much, Vincent, and thank you. Yeah, thank you, Peter. Thank you very much, Vincent, for the presentation. And I think we all see, we better understand now how transition plans can be a useful tool to both monitor and also steer what financial institutions are doing. And yeah, thank you for providing some insight on how you use this tool to engage with your counterparts. I think this, yes. Yes, thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Peter, for being here today. And I think this takes us to the second part of our discussion. So we've got, as we just had for KfW, we also have some guided questions for the rest of our panelists. And we're going to start, I'm going to take it back to the initial order. I'm going to go back to that. I'm going to start with Carla, if you're online, I think. We had a question for you. If you could, and this goes to all the panelists, if you could keep it short, because I see we only have 30 minutes left, and I don't want to run too late for everyone who's still hanging in there on the last day of COP. So if we could keep it to time, that would be excellent. So, Carla, we had a question for you as TSKB became secretary of the Net Zero Banking Alliance last year, I believe. So committing to align your portfolio with net zero by 2050. We were wondering what lessons, and this relates to what you were saying earlier, I think, what lessons learned can you share with us on the calculation of greenhouse gas emissions from lending operations, and how is this approach going to affect your investment decisions? If you could tell us a little bit more about that. Thank you. And we've put the slides up, or you have back again.
Okay, thank you. About calculating the GHG emissions is a challenging issue accessing the data. Actually, I explained we engage with our clients, but we learned that they need a technical support in order to give us necessary information. Some of them, yes, already calculate their GHG emissions, but some of them are not. So that it was a challenging issue, but because of the time concern, I would like to move on to the next question, what we are doing in our credit committees in the decision given position. Let me highlight this issue. Our SBTI targets are disclosed in each credit committee. And as engineers, we are calculating the all potential clients' GHG emissions and their contribution to our target. It is sometimes positive and sometimes negative. Even it's negative, we highlighted the issue. We hope to see all of them has positive impact, but this is a private bank. We are not a non-profit organization, so that yes, we finance those investments, even they do not contribute to our target. But what we believe is we can engage our clients. For instance, let's think that there is a new client who is increasing our GHG emissions, and then we engage this client, and then we would like to see a transition plan, as EBRD and the other financial institutions mentioned. We would like to see they can develop a transmission plan, and also SCSKB, we are providing a technical support, technical assistance, all those clients, so that they can develop new projects, or so they can prepare their transition plan. So we think that we are starting a new way with them. Yes, not all of the investments are so carbon friendly, let me say, but we hope to see that they will develop new climate related investments in the upcoming period. This is what we believe.
Thank you very much, Carla. Thank you for that insight and how it helps you engage with your counterparts. That was very interesting, and I'm sure. I mean, what we'll do as well as the mainstreaming initiative, if anyone has any questions and they come up to us, we'll, if that's okay, share your contact so that you can exchange with them. That's part of what we do as well. Yes, thank you. Now I think next in line, and maybe Siloshini, if you could probably come up a little bit closer so that the rest of the audience can see you. Thank you. We also had a question for you. We were wondering, and so sorry, I've lost where I was now. Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, it was on just transition. You're playing an active role in South Africa's achievement of the just transition towards net zero by 2050, and we were wondering what that entails and what challenges that this implies for you in contributing to an economy that is both decarbonized, inclusive, and resilient. If you could share a little bit of insight on your specific context there.
Yeah, it's not as easy as it seems. So whilst, everybody wants to respond about being a just transition, but what it really means on the ground, and I was I sat through a recent panel this morning where there was that discussion about, I think it was at the South African Pavilion actually, where we were talking about exactly what it means. And, local government basically also just redirecting their, attention back to us as to how we're assisting them in terms of a just transition. And so we have a high amount of exposure to local government, right? And so when you're looking at a just piece in the just transition, it's talking about the social side. It's talking about upskilling. It's talking about vulnerability. It's talking about capacitating local governments that are the most vulnerable to be looking at climate risk matters more holistically. And so it is not as easy. We do have a few kind of initiatives that have been piloted at the DBSA through the likes of D-Labs, for instance. D-Labs are kind of platforms that enable, or we're going to potentially use them to facilitate this type of skills transfer. When we're looking at strategic focus areas in South Africa, most specifically in towns where it was traditionally, historically, and still is coal towns in the country. And I think it's been quite interesting but also encouraging that our international lenders have also been now going into grassroots level, understanding what our just transition plan is strategically for the country, but then also having discussions with us about where our priorities actually are. And absolutely, we would want to line up exactly in that respect to understanding where are the key priority areas. One of the other examples are, except for Mpumalanga, I think everybody knows that there's an economic diversification story that underpins that tilt for that town. However, the public transportation sector is also, it's been quite vocal, but also there's been quite a bit of work that's already been initiated on the public transport side. And DBSA is already starting to move on that. So I think that is what just transition means for us. And then obviously on the back end of that internally, we're also looking at going back to greenhouse gas accounting and so forth. We are looking at the specific methodologies that we would want to employ, being partnership, carbon accounting, financials, lining up to that, looking at our own operations, and so forth. And that's all talking towards our aspirations for net zero by 2050. We haven't yet started doing too much of detailed work in terms of interim target setting, but that is definitely underway. We are working with a number of researchers in that respect, consultants and so forth to get that underway. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Virginia. It's great to have some concrete examples of initiatives that are being implemented to actually implement the just transition, the just part of the transition. So that's very helpful for us to understand that. Thank you for that. Now turning to Nora, the question that we had for you, because we know you're very engaged in supporting your clients, as a little bit like EBRD is, in mainstreaming climate into its operations. So the question we wanted to ask you is how you at IDB Invest deal with this issue. Considering the different types of financial instruments, clients and financial intermediaries that you have more broadly.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting challenge. So EBRD already talked about their approach towards on lending with financial intermediaries, right? And there's a joint MDB methodology on that, and this is also what we orient ourselves towards. And similarly, when it comes to the direct investments that we're doing, we have one methodology, again, joint MDB methodology that follows the money. So when we do direct finance, project finance, we will apply that methodology on the mitigation side, either looking at universally aligned, universally not aligned, or applying a methodology in between. But interestingly, in some cases, we also do financial instruments where you cannot really follow the money. So where we need to look at the counterparty in turn. So for instance, when we do working capital to corporates, where we take equity in corporates, which is something that we're also looking to increase, or where we provide liquidity support, these sort of things, then we do need to look at the counterparty. And IDB Invest was actually the institution that led the MDB working group in developing the methodology. It's called the General Corporate Purpose Finance Methodology. It's a bit of a mouthful, but we really do believe that it's a reasonably simple methodology, both on the mitigation and adaptation side, that allows us to take a systematic approach and to really walk the talk in terms of being banks for the transition. So taking this forward-looking approach and making sure that we can finance the transition without giving our clients a blank check. So holding them to their word and really looking at, is their transition plan credible? How can we help them in developing that transition plan and so forth? But being really clear that we want to help our clients, enable them, and then of course that often goes very much hand in hand also with the advisory services that we'd be offering. So we're sort of having this two-pronged approach.
Thank you, Nora. That's really interesting once again, and very nice to see how you accompany your counterparts. And I'm sorry, I think I missed a word out in the methodology, but I'm sure you'll be able to share it with us, and we can probably have workshop on that with the initiative. Thank you for that. And I think maybe now Vincent, if he's still online with us, will be able to reflect a little bit on that and maybe go a little bit broader even in the conversation on how to engage with the broader financial system. Yes. Vincent's online, I hear. Great. We wanted to take this counterparty engagement even further, and we had a question for you on how you engage with the other actors, Vincent, at EBRD, of the financial system, and what role they may have to play in the alignment of counterparts.
Sure. Yeah. Maybe three examples. I mean, I already alluded to our work with financial regulators, right? So I gave some examples like in Morocco and Armenia, and we think engaging with financial regulators is probably important for at least two reasons. As I mentioned, the regulatory framework is, of course, very important in terms of setting the framework under which particularly financial institutions work on transition planning, what expectations there are in terms of climate disclosures, climate risk stress testing. So in that regard, of course, we need to also work with regulators. Of course, noting that regulators take different views, right? So we see regulators that probably take a bit more of a strict approach, and they really want to regulate this area quite strictly. Maybe other regulators that sort of set a bit of a broader framework, and then basically expect the finance institutions to run with it and act within that broader framework. I think secondly, we also think our engagement with financial regulators are important to create a bit of a platform where both the financial regulator and the financial institutions can come together to discuss these points, because I think it's also important that there is a bit of an open discussion between the market and the regulator, and this is also something we try to facilitate as EBRD. Second element that I would probably mention, and I think it was already mentioned by previous speakers, we also feel at EBRD that it's very important that we engage with other international financial institutions and development partners, both to make sure that we seek to maximize synergies. As we know, this is quite a busy area with a lot of technical support being provided by IFIs and other development partners, and it's of course important that we don't end up duplicating things. And in terms of our transition planning approach, we're really seeking to ensure that as much as possible we try to align our expectations on, for example, transition planning with other IFIs, right? Because of course it would be a bit of a nonsense if we would start working with a local bank to put in place a transition plan, and then in 2 years' time, IFC would start working with the same client and say, well, actually, the transition plan that you developed with EBRD is not acceptable for us, or vice versa, right? So I think there, the engagement with other IFIs and development partners is very important. And maybe finally also working with partnerships, right? So the NGFS, Transition Pathway Task Force, the Coalition of Finance Ministers. We also think that these platforms are very important to engage with, to make sure that we engage on this topic in a holistic manner. And I think particularly on these platforms, we feel that our role is really to bring in also the practical feedback we get from our clients, right? Banks, as was already mentioned by the colleague from TSKB, these are the people that are actually implementing all the guidelines that are being provided, right? And I think it's important that we provide practical feedback, also bringing in the emerging market context into these discussions, right? Because I think there is sometimes a bit of a tendency that these discussions with the platforms are a bit more focused on developed markets, if I may call them that way, and they probably account a bit less for the emerging market context. So this, I think, is also very important that we bring this practical and emerging market context into these discussions.
Thank you very much, Vincent. And I think that's a great way to finish this second round of questions with the importance of collaboration with these different stakeholders who each have a role to play. And I can't insist anymore, especially as head of Secretariat of the Mainstreaming Initiative, I have to insist on the importance and benefits of collaborating and exchanging with one's peers. So thank you for that. I'll probably ask you just, the four of you, if you could sum up maybe the next challenges in 1 or 2 sentences if possible, because I'd love to be able to keep 5 minutes for questions if we have any questions from the audience. So if that's okay, I'll probably turn over to Carla for some concluding remarks on her side and maybe next steps that you envision. Sorry.
Thank you. What we will believe in, financial sector has a transformative power to a low carbon economy. So what we are doing in Turkey, and I guess we are all financial institutions here in our region, we would like to see that low carbon transmission is realized in our regions. So our role is encouraging them, taking great position to finance relevant investment. This is my message as the ending of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you very much. And we'll keep maybe see if there are any questions for you from the audience in a minute. Next in line, I think it was you, Celestini, if you have any final words that you would like to address to the audience.
I think we covered most of it. I think for us it is really early days, but again, we're late in the game. I think everybody's now moved on into nature-based solutions and all of those discussions. So really we're going to be trying to scale up our efforts in terms of getting our reporting in line and trying to make sure that it's consistent. And I think that's where our work lies, really. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Celestini. We look forward to, if we can, helping you with that and following what you're doing. Nora?
Yeah, so in many regards, it's staying the course, keep engaging internally, externally, and keep evangelizing sometimes, quite frankly, but also keep learning. We are always repeating internally. We are learning by doing. This is a journey, and I think we've made great strides on this journey. Perhaps as next steps for us, we are still working on building the systems to make it more easily for us to implement the processes. So just, regular change management that you could apply to anything really, but then also on the other BBs perhaps. So on internal operations, we have some work to do, and I guess beefing up climate finance, improving how we are doing the assessments. It's just work that is gonna keep on happening.
Great, thank you, Nora. Same with you. Good luck, and we're there to help you if we can through the initiative or as in our role of researchers. Vincent, maybe if you can still hear us, a couple of concluding remarks before we turn to the audience on your side.
Yes, I think what we tell our clients is start and don't be scared to make mistakes, right? I think we should sort of get a bit away from this idea that there's one transition plan, and the transition plan that a client will develop will be the perfect and final one. So I think all the barriers that we know, the lack of data, the plethora of guidelines. What we really tell our clients is, don't stop, don't let that stop from getting started, right? And just appreciate that. And I think it was also mentioned by other colleagues, mistakes will be made. And I think also internally, in terms of how we look at our Paris alignment, I think we will try to catch all the projects, but we also appreciate that maybe we'll also make mistakes internally, and maybe in 2-3 years' time, we'll realize that the project that we assessed as Paris aligned in the first place didn't turn out to be Paris aligned, or we need to sort of adapt the approach. So I guess both for ourselves and for our clients, start, don't be scared to make mistakes, and don't expect to be perfect, because as was said, it's a very complex challenge that I think we're all grappling with.
Thank you, Vincent. I think the mainstreaming initiative, we definitely relate to that. We sometimes say we prefer ambition to results, but we like both. But obviously we prefer the institutions that join us to have strong ambitions, even if their results are not great at first. So yeah, definitely relate to that. So now with all this information and all these experts in the room, I'm wondering whether we have any questions on any of the presentations that we just had, any of the remarks, questions on next steps, or even remarks on the challenges that have been pointed out. I don't know. And also, I see one question from Fabio. Also, for those who are online, I don't know if Laurent's still around as well. If you would like to ask a question, I'm not sure how it works, but I'm sure we can take it. So we have a question from a gentleman over there who will introduce himself directly.
Hello, thank you very much for the presentation. Sorry. I'm losing my voice.
All right, I don't know if there are any other questions when we wait for maybe for him to be able to ask it. Maybe someone else can ask it. We have another question here, so that will give you some time, Fabio, to get your bearings.
Thank you so much. Yeah, just to give Fabio some time.
Sorry, for the ones online, everyone's coughing around here. No one can actually manage to ask the question.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you for all your presentations. My question was for Nora. You mentioned that whenever emissions were material enough, you would be disclosing them. And my question was, on what basis would you consider them to be material or not? And do you see that driving, for example, if you compare with the national carbon budgets in the countries you operate in, if you have that, do you see that also driving further investment decisions? Thank you.
Yeah, Fabio's also standing up again. We can take both questions.
Sorry, Ian Cochrane, really related to Sarah's question, and it was more for EBRD. When you're doing your kind of assessment of your counterparties and seeing they're at different stages of their alignment journey, are you also taking into account also the potential impacts they might have because their operations or the sectors they're involved with might actually have higher levels of material harm in terms of more exposure to fossil fuels? So even if they're very early on, you need to be giving them more attention because the risk of significant damages might be higher compared to other clients in less, emissive sectors. So just kind of that question of nuancing relating to materiality.
Hi again, sorry about that. The question was related to, well, there's a lot of talk on having a transition plan and, okay, let's work with everyone, and if they have a transition plan, we should be able to work with them, but isn't not easy to formulate it, but I'm afraid that just by having a transition plan and how to assess the credibility of these transition plans, and that's really the point. And have you started thinking about that?
Thank you very much, Fabio. I don't know if you managed to introduce yourself, but you're from Popparco. I'll probably take those first three questions to start off with, and if we've got time, we'll take a couple more. So I believe there was one for both IDB Invest and EBRD, and then a more general one for all of you on transition plans, especially probably for EBRD and IDB Invest, actually, but for all of you.
So on the absolute emissions, so we apply IFC performance standards as part of our sustainability policy, and that means so we will disclose. It's in performance standard 3. There's an absolute threshold from which point onwards companies are required to monitor their emissions and then also reduce them, which is 25,000 tons CO2 equivalent. However, in practice, also because greenhouse gas practices are advancing, we are able to get the data in many cases also when emissions are actually much lower, and then whenever we have the data, we are in fact disclosing it, and we've also invested quite a lot in actually having an internal system. We have a fully digitalized greenhouse gas emissions management system that allows us also now, when we don't have the inventory data available from clients, to make an estimate using benchmarks or using activity level data. So that's on the one side giving us more confidence, but on the other hand, also again going back to the credo of helping our clients, helping them sort of and nudging them on that journey.
Thank you, Nora. Maybe Vincent, you also want to provide some answers to the two questions that were addressed to you.
Yes, maybe on the first question about our methodology. So in terms of our Paris alignment matrix and the tools we use, we really focus on assessing the current climate practices of a bank, and this is very much aligned with the TCFD approach, right? So it's focusing on governance, strategy, metrics and targets, climate risk management, and disclosure. So the tool that I mentioned is really designed to assess where the bank stands in its current practices, and basically the idea is that, for example, if they're at early stage, we will they need to develop a transition plan within 2 years that will take them to the next stage. Now, in terms of but that's on the overall climate practices. Now we do feed in sort of a consideration of the portfolio of a bank when we assess a project. So, for example, we rate each bank's based on physical and transition risk score, and based on that, for example, we may decide that a transaction that would not require a transition plan under the use of proceeds approach, if we feel that this transaction is very risky, we may actually decide that we will insist on a transition plan already from the start. So I think, yeah, to answer your question, yes and no. So in the diagnostic tool, we don't bring in the reflection of the portfolio, but in the overall assessment of our financial institutions with more exposure to climate risk sectors are probably more prone to join the group of banks that are developing transition plans earlier than banks that don't. Hope that makes sense. I mean, the methodology is also available online, so I think it's 80 pages, so you can assess it at your ease.
Yes, Ian's giving me the thumbs up, so it should be. I think he's pleased with the answer. Fabulous, yeah. I don't see any more questions. If there are any, please raise your hand now, or otherwise I'm going to close the session for today. No, I think we're done. Well, thank you very much, all of you, for this very interesting and vivid conversation. Again, I know it's a topic that's very dear to us all here today, and the ones of you, for those of you who are online, I think there was a good participation considering the time and date of this event. So yeah, it shows that it's still of interest to many of us. Thank you very much for the interesting insights that you each provided. If any of you want any additional information or want to be put in touch, we can definitely do that. We can also, well, the recordings will be made available online, both, I believe, on the IDFC YouTube and on our mainstreaming initiative platform. So please feel free to watch it again if you've missed anything there. We look forward to continuing this discussion next year. Our report will be out sometime soon as well. We'll definitely share it with you, and we'll be organizing other events on the topic very soon. So thank you very much, and I think our panelists here deserve a round of applause, as well as our presenters. Thank you very much.
Alignment and climate strategy, offering trainings on climate risk assessment, climate strategies, and adaptation.